This is the China Hollywood Greenlight podcast, episode number 37.
And rolling sound. Quiet.
Here we go. Ready.
Speeding. 120, take 7.
And action.
This is Caryn McCann, the host of the China Hollywood Greenlight podcast, a podcast about creating and distributing content for both Hollywood and China. If you like the show, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find this podcast. These ratings really do help spread the word. Any links mentioned in the podcast can be found in the show notes at chinahollywoodgreenlight.com/podcast and look for this episode, which is number 37. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to start out with a motivational quote to encourage our listeners to continue on their path to achieving their own green light. And today's quote is from George Eliot, and he said, "It is never too late to be what you might have been." Today's podcast is sponsored by The China List. The China List is a membership website to connect writers and producers in Hollywood and China. Membership for producers and talent reps is free, and you can post writing assignments or calls for script submissions on our private writing jobs page. Just go to https://chnlist.com. Writers, for a limited time, you can sign up for a free 60-day trial. You can also post a request for a Chinese or Western writing partner on our private writing jobs page. Use this link to access the free trial. https://chnlist.com/promo. A quick update on what I'm working on. I finished a low-budget, limited location script, and now I'm shortlisting directors and stars as well as potential producers. I'm excited because I really kept the cast small and the locations to a minimum. Hopefully, this will make it easier to raise financing. And here is the main segment. Today's guest is Scott Einbinder. Scott Einbinder is a motion picture producer, executive, investor, and consultant with broad experience in film financing, international sales and distribution, acquisitions, marketing, business affairs, and production. He is president of Los Angeles-based A&A Media, which he founded in 2004. During his over 30-year tenure in the entertainment business, Einbinder has produced and or executive produced 24 films, including the 2017 box office hit, The Hitman's Bodyguard, starring Ryan Reynolds, released by Lionsgate Films. From 2015 to 19, Einbinder was co-CEO and president of the Chinese-backed Crystal Pictures, which co-financed The Hitman's Bodyguard and financed and produced the China-Hong Kong co-production Twin Blades. He has worked with, represented, and consulted for a number of Chinese producers and financiers. He is a widely respected expert on the China film business. Well, Scott, thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Well, let me start off with the first basic question. Why did you want to, you've got all this Chinese experience, background. Why did you want to enter the China market?
You know, it wasn't something I consciously decided, but I guess maybe 8 or 9 years ago, maybe it was even a little more, I had a project that I was doing or trying to get made with Sony Pictures. And the project took place in Japan.
Oh,
and
okay.
It was an action movie. It was it was a blacklist script. And as we were trying to put the financing together, we were trying to find a place that seemed to be more, made more sense to shoot in somewhere where there was either a lower cost of production and or tax credit, or would make sense for a certain marketplace. And we kind of retooled the movie to take place in Hong Kong instead of in Tokyo. It seemed to make sense. So I started meeting a lot of people from the China market and from Hong Kong. And although the movie never got made, and I still hope that maybe in the future we can make it, it did lead to me kind of entering the Chinese market and going over there a lot of times and starting to meet producers and studios and financiers. And that's what I've really been focusing on the last good 8 or 9 years.
Well, you've got quite the background. You're not only a producer, you're an executive, you're an investor, consultant. I know there's no such thing as a typical day anymore, but what are 2 or 3 main tasks you do on a typical day?
Well, it's pretty varied. I mean, I have other companies I'm involved in too that have nothing to do with China, but I would say that a good focus of my day is still trying to do deals with China and work with Chinese partners, which means I'm on starting my day, around 5, 6 p.m. every day on WeChat with phone calls and Zooms with folks in China, Hong Kong. We still are in post-production on a movie that we shot about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago in China called Twin Blades with the Chinese star Ma Li. And it's an action comedy. And that's still in post-production over in Beijing. There were some delays in post-production for various reasons, including needing to do some more shooting and raise some more capital. I work with my partners in China on that. I'm not involved in that day to day with the post production, but we're still trying to get that movie finished and get that out into the marketplace. I've been working with another Chinese client called M-Star International in Beijing, which also has an office here, and we worked on a movie called Think Like a Dog together, which is a U.S.-China co-production. We sold it here in the U.S. to Lionsgate and to Netflix for certain territories. And it's we're trying to put together, or they're trying to put together a release for later this year in China. It's mostly English speaking, really like 90+% English speaking movie, but there is a Chinese element to it. And it was financed out of China by a company called M-Star, along with China Film Group and some outside investors there. So the only place that has not been actually released yet is China, because it needed to be re-edited for the Chinese market. And I work with a number of other clients and folks in China on a regular basis as a consultant, as a partner. So I'm on the phone and do a lot of work with Chinese folks really every day. I also, as a manager, represent a talented director in Hong Kong named Barbara Wong, who just finished directing a Chinese language movie about a week ago, actually. She's based in Hong Kong, but she works in China mostly. And then I have another client who's a director based in Shanghai, who is a super talented director that we're trying to move into the U.S. market to direct over here. He went to film school in the United States at USC, but he's from Shanghai, lives in Shanghai with his family, and his English is probably better than mine. So I think that he can easily move into into the US market as a director. So working on projects with him and trying to guide both of their careers to move into the international marketplace.
Are you working for those two directors as a consultant or as a manager? Really
as a manager, not as a consultant. So yeah, I represent as a manager a few writers and directors, and these happen to be two that are based one in Hong Kong and one in China.
Wow, that's you wear many hats.
Yeah. Well, I think it's there's a lot of interesting things going on still over there, even though the marketplace is a little difficult right now for many reasons, as you probably know. But especially between doing deals that involve financing between China and the U.S. is pretty tough right now. But we're all hoping that will ease maybe next year into 2022 and get back to being focused on the business and not the politics.
Exactly. Well, amen to that.
Yeah.
Speaking of the financing, how do you find business partners, and how do you suggest the listeners find perhaps a Chinese financier or producer?
Well, a lot of it is trial by error, quite honestly. You meet a lot of people who say they have money or they want to do this or that. And, a number of them don't pan out, or people contact me a lot because I have my name out there through different just years of doing this. People recommended me or make introductions to me. And I've definitely had my share of clients who have turned out to not be as trustworthy as I would have liked, or been able to deliver as much as I thought they could. But some do, and you just have to start asking the right questions, being savvier. I've definitely wasted time on trips over there or time on WeChat calls and making introductions. But, eventually you get to be a little bit more savvy or smart about who's real and who's not. And and it's also partly to do with, geopolitics, what's going on in the marketplace with respect to, can somebody actually get money out of mainland China, or does somebody have money offshore that they can get to? A lot of people, in China make representations that maybe aren't as I don't know, as realistic as you would like. And also the culture of doing business in China is, I think some folks don't value long-term relationships in maybe the way we do in the US. So they'll walk away from a deal at the last moment and not worry about the longer term consequences, especially with respect to relationships or doing business with somebody in the future. They're very focused on what they can do now at this moment, but don't think about the long term. I try to bring up to my clients that is an important part of doing business in the West, is you have to care about the other side of the person you're doing business with, and how your reputation is in the U.S. or in Europe. I think that's less important of a concern in China, especially mainland China. And so I do try to emphasize that quite a bit. But Chinese people that I work with or have worked with in the past hate to say no. So they'll say yes, even though it's not really a yes. Right. They don't want to be the bad guy to say no, or I'm not interested, or I can't do that deal. So, you have to be upfront and be ready to know that a deal may not work out or pan out.
Well, okay. Well, that leads to my next question. You talked about a couple obstacles right there, perhaps problem clients or the Chinese attitude towards long-term relationships. What obstacle did you encounter on a past project? How did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
Well, I think that a lot of people in China tend to say, we have money, we have financing. But in China, a lot of folks, the way they do business, not everybody at all, believe me, but a lot of folks, enter into a deal and will sign a document that may not, they think that's the start of negotiations, not the end of negotiations. Because in China, people renegotiate all the time. And then second of all, people make commitments to finance something, or to, they say they have capital, but what they're really doing is using that as an excuse to then go around and start raising capital themselves to then bring to you. They don't actually have the capital. So you have to cut to the chase very quickly and make sure that they really understand and you have clarification on what they can bring to the table now, not maybe a year from now. And you have to make sure that you and that person are on the same page, and they're not misrepresenting what they can do now, but they're not looking as your deal they're not looking to leverage that deal to go out and raise capital. That's very, very common in China. So you have to be very upfront, ask the right questions, and be ready to walk away if you don't think the person is real or the person has the capacity to deliver on what they said they can. And that's really whether they're a distributor, whether they're a potential financier, whether they're a potential co-investor. It happens all the time. I was engaged recently by a distributor who was also a burgeoning platform in China for content, and they wanted to go try to buy a big library of content. And we got into negotiations with the seller, or not the seller, the representative of a big library of content they wanted to license, and spent a lot of time brokering this deal. And I was very upfront with them. Do you actually have the capital to do this deal? And they told me they had backing from a big company, and then they just walked away at the end. And that happens. I'm very upfront with people that, I can only vouch so much for my client because that in China is done all the time. So I'm very cognizant of if I'm brokering a deal, making sure I'm upfront with both sides.
Okay,
Because
so
I don't want to get blamed for something
right.
like that.
So that would be, for example, how to overcome the problem of perhaps people misrepresenting or maybe exaggerating.
Well, I want to make sure nobody exaggerates. So I go
Right.
with people on both sides and tamp down expectations. Let people know that I have not seen, I don't know, proof of funds.
Right.
That I've asked a lot of questions, but I can't guarantee that they can close the deal. All I can do is try to bring both sides together.
Right.
And I've done it successfully many times.
Right.
But I also have to tamp down expectations and be very upfront, so my reputation never gets tarnished. And a lot of times I have to explain to people how people in the West, how Chinese look at deals, how Chinese negotiate deals, and make sure they're aware of it. One thing I have found out is that almost every, I can't say every, but many companies in the U.S. have been burned and had bad experiences with trying to do deals with Chinese companies or Chinese producers or investors.
Oh boy.
So I have to overcome that a lot because a lot of them don't even want to go down that road anymore. Whether it's an agency, whether it's a potential client that you're working with, whether it's a piece of talent, everybody's been burned, and so many people don't want to do business with Chinese companies because of that. So it's interesting. The thing is, because I've spent so much time in China, gone over there so many times, I have a good feel for how Chinese investors, producers, executives think, and you just have to make sure you don't just work with somebody because they want to pay you, but you really need to make sure that the payment's not worth the tarnishing of your reputation,
right?
If that's going to lead to that. So I'm very cognizant of that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a few problems in there. What if you could magically solve two current problems? What would they be?
Well, the biggest issue right now is that the Chinese government is constrained is constraining many media companies. We read about this every day, whether it be big tech companies like Tencent or Alibaba, or companies like Wanda, who are obviously in the film business, or even smaller companies with respect to what they can and can't do, how they can spend money. I think the government is really trying to get entertainment and media companies to focus more on internal investment in China, not on doing deals with companies outside of China. So that's a big issue. If companies in China want to do deals outside of China, making payments, wiring funds is very difficult for anybody because of the oversight of the government and restricting how much money they can wire offshore and how often they can do that. It's not easy to get approval for wiring money offshore. Obviously, many companies and many wealthy people do already have money offshore, so they have to use those funds. But they have to also be very careful about not looking like they're doing too much Hollywood business or high-profile business or offshore business, because they need to worry about their reputation in China. So it's definitely the business back and forth between Hollywood and China is definitely the amount of deals being funded and how those deals are being done has definitely pulled back a lot over the last 2.5 years. It's a little bit easier with Chinese companies who have outposts in Hong Kong, and there definitely are some of those. But even then, there's, the government is making sure that banks in Hong Kong are being conservative and letting them know what's going on. So it's not, even if you have money in Hong Kong, if you have a Hong Kong outpost of a Chinese company, it's still, I know of many instances where even Hong Kong outposts can't just easily wire money to the United States. There's a lot of questions being asked. So just have to be realistic about what you can and can't do. um, and about keeping, not having these deals be in the press, keeping them low profile, as opposed to 2 years ago, everybody in China wanted, 3 years ago, everybody wanted a lot of press.
Interesting.
It's changed quite a bit. Hopefully that will ease and get better in the future.
Now, you said that's the capital flight is one major problem you are hoping you could magically solve. Was there a second one?
Well, I mean, capital flight is one issue. I think companies are concerned about, obviously, most Chinese companies who are looking to invest in content or do deals in Hollywood or even Europe. They want rights to content, but getting an import license, getting a quota slot, getting censorship approval is not easy right now.
Yeah.
So that's why many companies were investing. I'll say the larger word Hollywood was to get that content because Chinese consumers want to see that content, but getting approval to distribute that content in China is not easy. We co-financed Hitman's Bodyguard. We did not do the second one because we were concerned that we would not be able to get a quota slot or get, basically an import license and lastly a censorship approval. And then you might make an investment and not be able to exploit the content, and then you're stuck. And that's happening a lot right now. I know many instances like that. So I think it's very reticent for Chinese companies to even make deals for U.S. content. I think projects coming out of Europe is a little bit easier, depending upon what's going on bilaterally, maybe between a certain country in Europe and China at the moment. That does come into play. But I think that, going back to looking at things as business transactions, as not as political transactions, will get better in the future. Probably start off with Europe before it gets better with the U.S. To see what happens there. But it's difficult. So if you make a deal and you can't monetize that deal in China, there's probably not a reason to do it anymore. And that affects, the independent distributors, especially in the Chinese film market, who were making deals to buy high-profile independent movies and even TV series. So
talking about the future, what kind of future projects are you looking for? And the second half of that question is, what do you think the Chinese studios are looking for?
Well, I think it's going to get better. So I'm still working on some co-production projects, trying to not put all my eggs in one basket, looking at doing them as Hong Kong, China co-productions, Australia, China co-productions, though that's a whole nother issue now, obviously, with Australia. There's been some issues with Australia the last couple of years, even though I think there was probably more China-Australia co-productions in the past than with many other countries. So I think can't put all your, I guess, the eggs in one basket. I think you have to be doing that. Also, China's putting some pressure on and starting to censor content even in Hong Kong, which was never a problem in the past. So that's an issue. But at the end of the day, I think consumers in China, especially in Hong Kong, want U.S. content. But you have to be working with people who can view it as a business transaction, but know how they can get it approved. Because we've seen many times where a Chinese company will make a small down payment on an investment or pre-buy a movie and then just walk away from the deal when it's time to deliver the movie and get paid. So you have to be very realistic about that. But I'm working on both content or movies and TV shows that I think have commercial value in China, but not count on a Chinese deal to finance it. I think as a distribution deal that later on is, but I wouldn't do it right now on any type of getting an investment. Even if you sign a deal with a Chinese company, media company, for an investment as equity, or buying distribution rights, I'd be very hesitant to count on needing that financing to actually close production financing.
And the second half is that, what do you think the Chinese studios might be looking for? Or are they focused on the domestic market?
I think the studios are all looking on domestic plays right now. I've talked to a number of sources in China who are very tight with work with the studios, and all say the studios are not even buying a lot of independent product. They're all looking to finance their own movies that have some type of even within comedy or something that's very contemporary, have some type of pro-Chinese nationalistic point of view within them. And if you can't get a Chinese studio involved very early in the process of the project, even selling a local movie to them for distribution is not easy right now. So they're all being very conservative, and obviously I think the US studios who have movies to release in China that can still work, I think they have their own direct, obviously, relationship with the government and working with China Film Group. And they have very, very powerful people at the MPAA, and they're looked at a little differently than the independents are. So I think, the Disneys of the world will still release Marvel movies, but even they have to approach things in a much more sophisticated way than they have in the past, and really use some of the political power they might have, relationships, lobbying to get their movies released. I think for any independent company to be able to do that right now is very difficult.
Well, here's a trick question. What question did I not ask you that I should have?
I mean, you've asked a lot of good questions. I think one of the questions might be, will Hong Kong start being treated identically to mainland China with respect to content being produced, acquiring content, getting financing out of Hong Kong? And that's a big question, I think, that a lot of people are wondering, because there's many, obviously, Western companies that are very, whether it be investment banks or just hedge funds and others that are based in Hong Kong. And everybody wants to know, will they ever start being constricted similar companies in mainland China? Most people I talk to in Hong Kong say they don't think that's going to happen, because if Hong Kong ever loses its reputation, including using Hong Kong law to govern deals out of Hong Kong and the IPOs that happen out of Hong Kong will lose its luster. There's going to be a flight of people, even more than there is now, out of Hong Kong. And whether that moves to Singapore or maybe Taiwan, that would really hurt Hong Kong property prices. It would hurt future brains coming out of Hong Kong, because there's a lot of Hong Kong is a place for research and a lot of tech companies there. So that's a big question. So maybe there will only be restrictions on censorship, but maybe not as strong as there is in mainland China. But if there starts being a clampdown on content, if distributors can't acquire content or produce content, that could change things a lot. But I also think that people have to be careful, because nobody knows how far that's going to go in the clampdown with respect to a movie that might be imported into Hong Kong, or a movie that a Hong Kong financier or distributor wants to pre-buy or invest in. So I think that's still nobody knows, but freedom of expression with directors and writers is a critical issue that nobody knows where that's going to go.
And the challenge with that is that, do investors really want to put their golden egg in the Hong Kong basket when there's so many questions? So
yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, really is. And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that quite yet. It seems to me that if there was a clampdown on treating Hong Kong companies similarly to mainland companies with respect to the business side of things,
Right.
that would be horrendous.
No.
But nobody knows, and there's no indication that's going to happen now because there's many, many multinational companies that are both in media and not in media. And it seems to me that so far that's not going to change right away, but nobody knows.
Exactly.
And we all want to continue to do business with friends and with companies that we work with in Hong Kong. And even in China, I think ultimately there's going to be some easing, and as long as people work within the basic parameters, I think things will get back to a place where we can do business with mainland Chinese companies and investors in the media business, hopefully next year. We all have great friends and companies we work with in China and Hong Kong, and we want to continue to flourish and allow everybody to be successful.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, looking forward and looking at the glass half full, what advice can you give those aspiring to tap into the China market?
Be patient. You have to be patient. I think there's a lot of folks in China who want to learn from people in the West, especially in Hollywood. Establish relationships as friends, not just as business people. That's important in China. Getting to know people and having drinks or dinners or meals with them is part of the culture. That's important. I would say younger people, in their 20s and 30s, who many have gone to school in the West, in the US, either undergraduate or graduate school. They speak perfect English, but China's still their home. So forging those relationships is important. I'm obviously older than that, so a lot of the guys that I work with, not just guys, a lot of the people I work with don't always speak as good English, but I think I feel like everybody 35, maybe 40 and younger who went to school in Europe and Australia and the US, they're savvy, they're smart, they understand both sides. There's still a big future, and those are great people to do business with because they're a little bit more flexible. They understand both sides.
Right.
Some of the older folks, 45 and above, who are more traditional and have been running the media business, are not as comfortable doing business with the West just because they don't speak English. They haven't spent as much time here.
Right.
They didn't necessarily go to university here. And a lot of those people have younger people working for them, and they're brilliant. The Chinese value education. Younger Chinese value relationships. And they're great people to do business with and work with. And I work with a lot of young people that I talk to regularly because they're really smart. They've kind of put the brain power of what they've learned on both sides together, and they're going to succeed. And there's also great, talented writers and directors in China, great hustling young producers, and they all want to work with the West, especially Hollywood.
Wow, that's encouraging. That's encouraging.
Yeah. No, it's true though. It's true. They just look at things a little differently, maybe. But,
okay, I'm encouraged. Okay. Now, in conclusion, would you like to share any social media details or website links?
I don't really use social media too much, just because I really use it on a personal basis, just to I have a son who happens to be a young filmmaker, and he's 10. So he posts things. So I use it really just to follow him.
Okay.
And and the only I'm a partner in addition to my day-to-day business at A&A Media, where I conduct most of my business through whether it's management or producing or advisory work. I also separately am a partner at a advisory firm called 120DB Advisors.
Uh-huh.
So just spelled out 120D as in David, B as in boy, advisors.com. We do a lot of advisory and consulting work. So you can find me there. I have 3 partners and we do a lot of interesting work. We do sales. We work with investors. We work with funds. as advisors. And we work with banks doing valuations of film libraries. We have a lot of interesting things going on. So that's the only place that you can find me, probably on a website at the moment. I'm still involved with Crystal Pictures, which was the U.S. company that was backed by a Chinese company called Eastlight Media in Beijing. The company still exists, but it's not really an operating company so much anymore. But we still own projects, and we're still trying to push those into production. But obviously, the ability of the folks at Eastlight Media to get capital outside of moved outside of China is not so easy right now.
Right.
So I'm still involved with Crystal Pictures in some ways, but it's not really an operating company. They quite honestly Eastlight Media started having some difficulties moving money back to the U.S., but we're still in post-production on the movie Twin Blades. So that's where you can find me, and happy to talk to anybody who might have some opportunities that might be a place for Chinese financing or distribution or sales. So that's the best place to find me.
Excellent. Well, Scott, this conversation was very enlightening. It was very realistic, but also very encouraging. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Sure. My pleasure.
And we'll see you at the premiere.
Bye-bye.
And now for my 3 key points and 3 takeaways. Number 1, 3 key points. First one, valuing long-term relationships. Mainland China may not value long-term relationships like the West, so they may walk away from a deal at the last moment. Some mainland Chinese partners focus on what they can do now at this moment and don't think about the long term. In the West, you have to care about the other side and your reputation. That's less important in China, according to Scott. Number 2, be wary of investors who say they have capital. A lot of folks make commitments to finance your project, but really, some don't have the capital they say they do. They may leverage your deal to raise capital. You have to cut to the chase quickly and get clarification on what they bring to the table now, not 1 year from now. And be ready to walk away if you feel they are not real. This goes for potential distributors, financiers, and co-investors. It happens all the time, Scott says. Number 3, harder to get money out of China. The Chinese government is constraining big and small media companies. They are trying to get local companies to focus on internal investment. Making payments, wiring funds is very difficult. It's a little easier to deal with mainland Chinese companies who have a Hong Kong outpost, but it's getting harder. 3 takeaways. Number 1, don't count on Chinese investment for production financing. You can exploit your contact in China if you pass censorship and get an import license or get in part of the import quota. Getting approval to distribute that content is not easy. Chinese companies may be hesitant about doing U.S. deals in this climate, but business transactions should get better in the future. Europe may be in a better position to take advantage of this. Number 2, European partners. Scott is optimistic about the future and believes by next year things will get better and it will be easier to do deals in China. However, due to the political U.S.-China situation, Europe may be in a better position next year to take advantage of the improving Chinese business climate. You may want to consider a European partner on your next project. See my previous podcast, number 15, where I interview Cristiano Bortoni. He is a member of Bridging the Dragon, a European association that fosters collaboration between Europe and China. He talks about Bridging the Dragon's matchmaking events to connect Chinese and European producers. Number 3, the Hong Kong question. Will the mainland Chinese government constrict Hong Kong investment banks and hedge funds? Most people in Hong Kong feel that won't happen. The rule of law governs business deals and IPOs. If the mainland Chinese took a heavy hand with the Hong Kong banking system, there would be a flight of people even more than there is now. That would hurt Hong Kong property prices and there would be a brain drain. Scott says maybe there will only be restrictions on censorship, but not as strong as in mainland China. If there is a clampdown on content, that could change things a lot. Right now, nobody knows where it's going. Despite the obstacles, Scott believes there is big business opportunities to do in China starting next year. He mentioned young Chinese executives who studied overseas are more flexible than their older bosses. They also speak fluent English. These up-and-comers may be your key to a successful Chinese business deal. Well, that's the show. To show your support, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find this podcast. Producers and talent reps, you can find writers and scripts on the China list. Writers get discovered today. Sign up for a free 60-day trial. Just go to https://chnlist.com/promo. That's the show. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the premiere. Bye. 一会儿见.